Good morning, everybody. This is Vaughan here from NuPay and Delta. I head up the customer services divisions of NuPay and Delta services for the industry. Thank you for joining us today here to go through an overview of DebiCheck again. We have some fellow colleagues that's on the line here with us. They're standing ready and standing by to assist me in answering some questions. I will hand over to them shortly just to do a brief introduction of themselves. The first is Johan Fourie, who's my right-hand man in terms of all account managers and servicing customers on the face-to-face. And yes, we still do face-to-face today on a face-to-face level. And the second is Brendan van der Mesht, who is the head of our logistics department. He's the guy who leads the team that does the actual physical installations with you guys. But I'm gonna hand over to them just to show you their faces so you know what they're all about. The one is standing by in terms of training questions that we might receive from you guys. The other is standing by in terms of training on a technical perspective that we might get from you guys. Unfortunately, I don't know everything. So yes, over to the next guy, and thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Johan Fourie from the customer relations side. Thank you for everyone for joining the session today, and we really look forward to receiving some questions around DebiCheck and that we can answer those questions for you and ultimately improve the experience for you on DebiCheck as well. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Like Vaughan said, my name is Brendan van der Mesht. I head up the logistics team at NuPay. I'm looking forward to some of your questions with regards to terminal-related issues or DebiCheck related questions via our NuPay terminals. I hope everybody's keeping safe during this pandemic. Looking forward to your questions. Cheers.
Right, so after our last seminar or webinar that we had, which was about a month and a half ago, regarding DebiCheck and actually altogether services delivered by NuPay and the team, we could actually see that from the questions that we received, that there were numerous outstanding items or requirements for more information around the DebiCheck network and platform specifically. So based on the questions and the volume of questions around DebiCheck, we decided to have another session just discussing the DebiCheck options and platforms. Prior to this, we have sent out the invitations to all of you guys, and thank you for registering with us to attend this session. During those sessions, we asked you all to please submit some questions, whatever questions you've got at that stage. And some of those questions, most of those questions, we've already handled in the presentation that we're going to be giving you. There are certain things that I'm not going to go into on this specific webinar. I'm not going to sit and discuss pricing on a minutiae kind of detail with all of you. I'm not going to try and do a physical training session with you. But please understand and be assured and rest assured that we are standing by and we are ready. Johan Fourie's team are ready to actually assist you guys with all of these training items and things that's going on. So the team can connect with you. They can do it physically. They could do it via Teams. There's various different options for us. And we can handle all of the training sessions and we can discuss the finer details of items and so forth. It is important for us that you understand holistically the concepts of DebiCheck and where this thing is going. Also understand, please, that at the end of this session, everyone that has registered for this and that has created and submitted their email addresses to us, in a day or two, you will be receiving an e-booklet based on this presentation. So we'll send you an e-booklet via mail and you will receive it, and it's based on this physical presentation. Then you can go and have a look at that. Then in detail, a little bit more around the format of how the reporting, how an upload of a transaction and so forth works. We are creating 3 little videos. The first will be how to create a transaction in a non-face-to-face environment. The second will be how to actually draw a report and see how to draw reporting on the system in DebiCheck. And the last will be a little video clip around how to conduct transaction maintenance, so how to manage your transactions. These video clips will be posted onto the DebiCheck site for our customers. So once you've actually logged into the system, you will see it there. I'll give you a little brief clip or just a snippet to show you exactly where you can find these things. So obviously for us here at NuPay, it's important to create options for our customers. And that is what this is all about. You know, going into a DebiCheck environment, we all thought that at the beginning of this year, that we had our New Year's resolutions and everything all panned out and planned. And we said, oh, so what are we going to do? You know, we had wishes and dreams for the year. We had big ambitions and drive and business plans and where we're going to put all of this stuff together and how we're going to build it. And what are we going to do this year to onboard new clients and so forth. We were doing planning around Eskom supply challenges that there might be, transportation for staff, family, kids, what school they're going to go to, and obviously what's for dinner tonight. In NuPay and Delta, we were very, very busy deploying DebiCheck terminals, systems, integrated solutions, training our staff, training our clients, doing roadshows across the country, doing all of these conferences, trying to educate people around DebiCheck, which was imminent and which was going to be cutting off ADO and NADO systems. We had created and still have specialized task teams that actually grow, develop, and enhance from a user experience perspective the entire DebiCheck platform and network. And these guys and girls, gents and ladies, have been tasked to set up and drive the enhancement of the overall experience, and then also to escalate and report on any challenges that they might be experienced. You know, when a new system goes live, such as this one, it is a very big thing in the world. It is a massive thing in South Africa. And the amount of work that goes into getting all of these things between all of the different banks and institutions and associations and so forth to work 100% correctly, it's tough. It's not something that's easy. So there's always a very big drive to get all of these things right, to get the answers right, and to make sure that the systems run smoothly. Then obviously in comes COVID-19 that causes an about turn for us. It kicks everything into a different gear, a little bit of reverse, a little bit of sideways. I've never seen cars drive sideways until then, but it happened, and we had to adjust to a new kind of normal. We needed just a little bit of time to actually adjust to this new normal of COVID-19. But some of us, like NuPay and the Delta team, we did not. We did not have time. We could not take time to actually go and adjust to this new normal that COVID had brought about for us, to move into the next year. So just quickly to touch on the timelines of DebiCheck, these were the previous timelines that were set out. And as you can see there on the top, if you look on the far right-hand side, the last 2 dates that you've got, 1 May 2020 and 31 October 2020. Those were the sunset and cutoff dates for the DebiCheck system to take place. So we were going to be in a situation right now, in a scenario right now already, where you would not be able to create any NADO or ADO transactions at all anymore. You would be able to migrate or move over, convert your current transactions that you had already created pre-1 May into a DebiCheck environment. And that migration phase would have carried on until the 31st of October 2020. Now, obviously with COVID that came around, the risk of introducing a new system while the country's in lockdown, and there's not necessarily the right amount of resources in banking systems, in the central switches through BankServe, in all of the different institutions that play a role, was just simply not there. So the Reserve Bank, and good for them, decided to make an extension and extend the timelines and cut off timelines of the EDO platform and move it over to the following year. So those dates that you see there, you can just replace 2020 with 2021. So 1 May 2021 and 31 October 2021. These are our new timelines. This is when the EDO platform, ADO and NADO is EDO, will be cutting off, and those are your new migration timelines. So in essence, this is what we are looking now. Everyone has to be over onto this platform by the 1st of May 2021. This has actually brought quite a few opportunities for us because the system is live. Obviously, it has to be live because, well, guess what? We were preparing to be live by the 1st of May 2020. So this gives us a lot of time now, less every day, but it does give us a lot of time now to be ready for our next big switch over to a new payment system. So we've got an additional 12 months. The onus on us, and by the way, that 12 months is now less than 10 already. So the onus is on us, and by us I mean NuPay, Delta, as well as all of you, our customers, every single one of you that's using the system. The onus is on all of us to make sure that we understand the system, that we know the system, and that we can work with the system. If we don't do this, we're going to be sitting in a massive big problem come 1 May 2021. So we really want to do a call on every single one of you to start using the system. This is critically important. We're not saying that you have to move your entire book over. You could do that if you want to, and I'll discuss some challenges as we go along. But we certainly suggest that you start using the system. So one of the questions that there was on the chat group and on the registrations process is, what are the differences to ADO? So first of all, reversibility. So obviously the transaction in the DebiCheck environment does become reversible. And I'm going to sound like a very mock ad, but wait, there's more. Because it can only be reversed if that transaction is processed outside of the rules of DebiCheck. So it's critically important, people. You need to understand the rules. You need to engage with your consultants and ask questions. And please, there's no such thing as a silly question. When people, and that includes us as well, when we are learning a new system, the manuals around the thing, the kind of documentation that goes with it is immense. There is such a load of work that we have to work through, that we have to understand. It is absolutely critical that you understand it. And trust me, you will miss one or two things, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Speak to your consultants, and maybe they don't always have the answers to everything. Maybe they'll say to you, you know what, I need to check up on this for you, because the system is also in the finer details. It's also still a bit new to us. So the guys have to maybe go and find out a very intricate little component of how this thing works. And our customer said to us the other day, so this transaction was reversed when we processed this thing, and it was actually reversed by a consumer. We said, yes, the transaction was reversed. It was reported like that on the system. They said to us, but how was it reversed? So is this thing reversed from the consumer through his app, through the ATM, through... The truth is, we don't know. We don't know where specifically through which channel it comes in, but we can tell you that it can only be reversed in one of three instances. And we do have those responses with us. So we can tell you that a transaction was reversed because A, it did not match the original date. So those are one of the reasons why a transaction can be reversed. The date has been messed or tampered with or changed. So if a consumer has authenticated you to transact against his account on the 25th of the month, and you process that transaction on a different date, then that transaction becomes reversible based on an incorrect date. Now, there's lots of little intricacies around this thing to understand as well. And again, I'm not going to go into those little details right now, but the consultants can help you to manage these things effectively, because yes, you can still change dates. You can still make sure that a transaction is non-reversible. Another reason why transactions can be reversed is if the amount is changed. So there are three different transaction types, and I will go into them a little bit later on a bit more. But on those transaction types, when you change the amount of the transaction, and yes, in DebiCheck you can actually change an amount of a transaction. So if there's penalty interests, for instance, to be added, then you could do that. However, that transaction then becomes reversible because that was not the original mandated amount. The final reason why a transaction can be reversed is obviously because of fraud. So if there is fraud that can be proven against the transaction, and your consumer goes to his bank and he can show them that he did not, or she did not, in fact, authorize and authenticate that transaction, and that it was not them that authorized the transaction somehow, and we have to believe that this would be very, very difficult to achieve. Well, then that transaction can also be reversed for that reason. Another difference to the ADO platform is the fact that there's only 10 days of tracking available. So you will probably know that in the ADO and NADO platform, today you can process transactions for anything from 1 to 10 days of tracking. Then you could move over to 14 or 21 or even 32 days of tracking. So that has been stopped and that has been changed in the DebiCheck environment, and it allows for 10 days of tracking, which means that you have to manage your transactions a lot more effectively. So there's positives and negatives in that sentence. You know, people say, but this is a massive challenge for us because we don't know exactly when a transaction is going to hit an account. Well, you should have a very good idea. If you're talking to the employers and doing confirmation of employment and so forth, then you'll have those details. The challenges obviously come in around December, where the dates change. So I've mentioned this before in some of my discussions with people, and in some of the workshops that we've held before. It becomes very, very important for you to have a very good relationship with your pay office of your customers. So you know, it's interesting, but you know, some people use promotional and marketing materials where they actually brand stuff with their name on it, and then they hand it out to these companies. And there's nothing stopping you from having that. There's nothing stopping you from having golf days. But the relationship with the pay offices of big institutions, we've got lots of people loaning from you, taking up loans from you, is going to become very, very important, especially over December, so that you know that you're hitting these transactions on the right dates. So very, very important. The last difference, final difference that there primarily is against the ADO platform is that the transaction is authenticated still, but from a non-face-to-face remote environment. So at the moment, you're uploading a NADO transaction into a customer's environment, but you're doing that without an authentication, which means the transaction is reversible 100%. And very simple. They just go into the bank and say reverse. And within the first 40 days, the bank hits a button and that thing is gone. You've lost the money. The difference here is that you don't only have a card and PIN on a terminal that allows you to have a non-reversible transaction, but you also have a scenario where you could do a transaction remotely without a terminal, without a card and PIN reader, to actually authenticate a transaction and have a non-reversible transaction. So all in all, you have to say and you have to believe and agree that this transaction probably has some preference over the current scenario where we've got, especially in the NADO environment, where we've got transactions that can be reversed. So obviously the similarities between the ADO and the NADO platform is card and PIN on terminal. There's no difference, guys. In terms of the ADO network, we work with a card and PIN. You've got it face-to-face in front of the person. You can swipe that card. You can get the customer to enter his PIN or her PIN onto the terminal. There's no difference in the DebiCheck TT3 transaction type 3 kind of transaction. It is still card and PIN on a terminal. It works exactly the same way. So you could carry on to process like that. We've made the system backwards compatible as well, so that the look and feel of the card and PIN processing on the terminal looks and feels like an ADO transaction. So the change management process on your staff is minimal, and it is very small to have an impact on that. You could still also upload transactions on the website to NuPay, and you could also have an integrated solution. So through our LMS offering that we've got in the Delta services, Delphin and Webfin, those two platforms are totally integrated into NuPay, and there's automated uploading. You can do your rescheduling, you can do date changes, you can do all of your control and management, get all of your reporting, absolutely everything within those platforms. So obviously we are trying to make this thing work for you as best as possible with the least possible impact for you to go and change and manage a change management process within your branches. The web uploads via NuPay works very similar to a current NADO platform. If you're doing that manually and not integrated, it's very, very similar. The look and feel of it feels the same, and your staff will not have to go through a massive training exercise. But yes, there is some changes. There are some changes. There are some things that you need to take heed of. So it's very important that you connect with the consultants and that you actually get those training exercises done, that you start using the system so that they understand it. Getting a training session today, 1 month from now, if you've not used it, you will have forgotten how to use it. Very important to continuously keep on using this thing and see it get better and better over time, until we get to the cutoff time period of the 1st of May 2021. So obviously, when this whole COVID thing hit us, we had to make very urgent plans and so forth. And like I said, we did not really have any opportunities for us to start just taking a step back and move in a different direction. We had to start making plans immediately. We knew that it was very important for you guys, all of our customers, to be operational. Obviously, if you're operational, it means we have to be operational. But what does that mean? With our shops closed and all of your shops closed, well, your shops were closed, we were still open. But with all of your shops closed, we had to give you different options. And that's why we created the online solution for you guys, which we called the lockdown solution. In the lockdown solution, we launched a platform which was called Webfin, with web loans, DebiCheck, and NuCard, all of that integrated into one combined solution. And we made that available in absolutely record time to customers. And yes, we did not even charge for it. We made it available free of charge. Obviously, we're not talking about the actual transactions, which we have to pay to the bank. But the platforms were made available free of charge so that we can empower you and make available a solution through which you could upload transactions. As you know, the Webfin solution is 100% online. It is not a local-based installation. It is an internet-based installation. Web Loans is a platform through which your customers can upload and create their own transactions. So they can originate their own transactions, their own loans from a very simple platform. There's this one it's very, very simple. It just works on the SMS kind of a scenario where they just send in an SMS to you. And then that registers inside of the Webfin system, creates a DebiCheck transaction back to them, which they need to authorize. And then you can do the pay away to a NuCard for that consumer. We saw how important the NuCard solution became in this scenario, because if you did not have a NuCard solution available, how did you get the funds out to your customer? So you had to log on to your internet banking and do a transfer over to them. That was probably the only option for someone in a complete lockdown in level 5. And this was challenging. So it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of trust from your customer as well. Whereas if he's got the NuCard, it's instantaneous. He's got the money immediately and they can carry on transacting. So we needed a new approach of how to do business and how to work with you guys. We created WhatsApp chat groups all over the place with customers, with groups internally, with between different departments. We really had to get this machine working well. We set up Teams and Zoom training sessions with customers, and the consultants started working. And then from March into April, we saw 1,618% growth of DebiCheck transactions processing through an online lockdown solution network. That is phenomenal. And that all comes down to you guys. The next month was no different. We saw another 1,934% increase in transaction volumes coming through the system. And guess what? The system works. It does truly work. And people were able to transact and process their transactions successfully through a non-face-to-face in a lockdown environment. Guys, this is possible. It is something that you can do. So I think this is a very, very important step for us, and I'll clarify a little bit later on why we say so. So is the system perfect? No, the system is not perfect yet, unfortunately not. There are still some issues here and there. There are few and far in between. I've listed some and we'll discuss that with you quickly. Reporting from time to time is delayed to us, back to us from banks. So sometimes you see a debit going through on a transaction, but it goes through in a time window where we have not received a new update yet from the bank. So they report to us at 6 o'clock in the morning and then again at 8 o'clock at night. But that reporting happens on the back of a transaction that could have processed by 4:30 or 4:45 a.m. in the morning. So at 5:30 in the morning, his account could be debited, but that report was already compiled and we received the next report only at 8 o'clock. We are looking at ways and we're discussing with the banks, how do we improve this? How do we get better communication through these channels? And we will carry on driving these things. So yes, we do still have some delayed reports coming in. They do come in at night. It's not nice. We cannot take a stance where we say to customers, just work on the bank statement, because unfortunately we've had that before where people do work on bank statements and then the next day that bank statement is classified as an intraday bank statement for that bank, and the next day the bank statement has changed. We've seen some duplicate transactions that was debited against accounts, and then the next morning it has changed again, and it's not the same anymore. So there is that challenge. We've got some challenges where transactions are sent up to the banks by yourselves through our systems to get it authenticated. And there's a delay in getting responses back. There's a delay in getting the authentication done. It could be a combination of both as well, which actually further delays the authentication. So this is a new process. It is brand spanking new. We are working on a little booklet and a brochure, which we'll try and get out to you together with this e-booklet for this presentation, in which we will show you what the steps look like that your consumers receive specifically on the USSD strings on their phones. It looks like an SMS, right? But it's the USSD string that they receive from the banks. There is some stuff that's been published by PASA. It's on the website. It's available. Unfortunately, that stuff is dated. It doesn't work like that anymore. It has changed. There's some other challenges in that. One of the banks, unfortunately, for unbeknown reasons, have decided to send through a maximum amount instead of the regular installment amount, and I'll explain that later. And then the consumer sees this and he says, but there's a challenge here because the amount that you're trying to upload and get me to authorize is not the same as the installment, and then they don't want to authenticate. So we are working with the banks. We are pushing these things. We are driving it through PASA and all of the different angles to get this stuff resolved. We do see that some transactions have been disputed. We primarily had two banks that were guilty of that. The one bank seems to have implemented something now last weekend that looks like it might have fixed that issue, where a transaction can no longer be disputed if it's not on one of those three reasons that I've mentioned: date, amount, or fraud. But we still have one bank that's got some challenges on that. They have told us that they are working hard at getting it right and fixing that issue that they've got at the moment. The volume is low. As you can see there, the number is 0.053% of transactions processed. It's very, very, very low. But nonetheless, it is there. So unfortunately, transactions have been disputed. But it has already gotten better. So the statistics that I'm showing you is something that is valid over the past 6 months of all transactions, including our tests, where we obviously try to break the system, because that's how you test the system. You try and break it to make sure that it actually works correctly for customers. The biggest challenge primarily that we have experienced is that consumers are strange to the process. They don't understand it. They don't know how these things work. And that's why we are adding into the e-booklet, or want to add into the e-booklet, the process for how the USSDs has to be authenticated by the customers. Back to you again. Another challenge that we've got with that specifically is that, unfortunately, there's non-conformity between banks in their authentication process. So if you go to, if you get a USSD string from FNB and you get another one from Capitec, for instance, or Standard Bank, or whoever it is, what they are sending to the customers to get them to register, and please guys, it's not NuPay that actually sends that message to the consumer. It is the bank. It is that consumer's bank. They send him a message on the USSD string and they ask him to authenticate a transaction. But unfortunately, these things are not uniform between them. So there's an instruction on the banks to actually change that, to get it into one aligned process. We really look forward to receiving that. And then finally, we've got the ABSN, which is the abbreviated short name. So you will know when you process a transaction. Typically in the ADO environment, it would say NP dash and then a merchant number, but there's also a name next to it that could be 123 cash lumps, or whatever that might be that sits behind it. That could be A to Z Jim, and so forth. So that's your abbreviated short name. So at the moment, a lot of those transactions, not all of them, but a lot of them still say NuPay. Just say it's NuPay. It does not have your company name on it. So guess what? Your consumer receives a request to authenticate a transaction and it says NuPay. It does not have your company name on it. There is a bit of a delay in getting the registrations through. It's not a matter of only registering it with the bank. It has to actually, from the bank, go through to PASA. They have to register it as well and bring back and so forth. We're working on enhancements with these institutions to make sure that these things would work better in future. So a lot of drive from our side to try and make the system work better at the moment. But if you look at it as a whole, in terms of these challenges that we're experiencing at the moment, it's nothing that's going to break the bank. It's nothing that's going to stop you from having to use the system. The primary issue that we've got there is probably the change management process with consumers, and then those disputes. I can tell you that that's 0.053 over the last 6 months. In the past, probably let's look at 2 weeks just to cover the last big paydays that we've had. In the past 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, that number has come down to, well, I'd have to have 3 zeros after the decimal before I get into numbers. So it's come down drastically, and it's really improved. So the impact is minimal. It is not as big as it used to be. And like I say, we are waiting for the final bank to do some implementations so that we can start testing against those non-disputability rules. So let's just quickly have a look at the future. I went and did some research around online statistics, and you know, it's very difficult to find anything around microfinance in an online environment. So I had to fall back onto normal e-commerce statistics, and the references and the sources are listed at the bottom there if you want to go and have a look at these yourselves. I must tell you that these surveys were done in 2018, 2019. But it's very interesting numbers for me to look at that, and I'll get to why exactly. But if you look at business to consumer e-commerce portals, in 2019 processed 53 billion rand for the year through the system. So that's 897 rand per person on average if you work on the total population of 59 million people. Now, obviously, we know that there's lots of kids that don't actually process. There's lots of elderly people that don't actually process in those environments. So you could probably very safely double that number to see exactly what the impact is and how many people are actually processing and what values they are processing. There's 52% of the population that is processing in the e-commerce network or platform during the 2019 year. And in total, in 2019, South Africa had a 63% internet penetration rate. Now, that on its own is very high. If you consider that there's only probably 50% of the population that could have access to internet and get there, well, we are above the 50%. You know, once you've removed the very elderly people and once you've removed the very young kids out of internet penetration rates, looking at 63%, this is very good. It's a very positive sign for us. And people often say, yes, but hang on a minute, you know, you can't compare South Africa with the USA or the UK or Europe or wherever, because, you know, they're just so much more educated in terms of technology and that kind of thing. They've got fantastic connectivity rates, speeds, and all of these kinds of things. And yes, you're right. You're right about all of that. But that doesn't mean that we should not be starting to plan for the future. And if we look at this, we can actually see that the South African population is starting to work on electronic channels and going through these platforms. And people really, COVID has, if it's only taught us one thing, then it has certainly taught us that we have to look for other avenues through which we can actually improve and enhance our service delivery and our offering, and other channels through which we can originate and generate revenue and income for our businesses and for our families at the end of the day. So if you look at the prediction for the annual growth rate of sales in the internet online platform, they're looking at roughly 11%. Personally, I think that forecast is severely low. But if you go and look at that and you forecast that through to 2023, which is around the corner, people don't think that 2023 is far. It's not. It is right around the corner. We will be sitting at 83 billion rand of processing in e-commerce alone. I've got a guess that after COVID, this thing is going to be so horribly skewed, and we might end up in 2023 on exactly double those numbers that we are listed there. Now, again, consider that this is for 59 million people. Again, you should be looking at half of that. So 2,800 Rand per person would be your spend in e-commerce. That starts saying something. So people, our nation is getting ready for electronic processing, and you have to work with the program to actually get there. You know, 10% of the total production of e-commerce came through 5 suppliers only. So the question is, wouldn't we want to be part of that? Yes, this is retail, but I'm getting to my point. Online shopping, 38 million people predicted will be doing online shopping by 2023, which is 65% of our population. I would hazard a guess that we've actually exceeded these numbers now during COVID already. Who of you have all of a sudden started doing a lot more shopping online? I know I have. I never used to. I was very set against doing this thing because of security reasons, and I wanted to know that my money was safe. All of a sudden, I'm doing a lot of shopping online. My groceries get delivered to my house. Everything starts going online because I'm trying to keep my family in a non-exposed environment. So what is DebiCheck? DebiCheck is most certainly a product of the future. Those numbers that we just saw from e-commerce, this is no different for DebiCheck. It is something that will most certainly enable us to do online transacting and processing. It is something that will enable us to onboard customers remotely without seeing them face to face. It is up to us to embrace the technology and to say, yes, we can. Yes, we will. How do we do this and how do we take it further? It is up to us to train and coach our clients and our staff. And by us, I mean NuPay, Delta, as well as all of you. We have an obligation to ourselves, to our families, to approach a different product, to take this product, embrace it, and say, yes, we can do this. NuPay and Delta have played a part. We have created team sessions, as I've mentioned already. Teams is a free download as well that you can do off the internet. So please download that, because we can actually do a lot of video training with you guys. We can also do these training sessions by TeamViewer, as you know. But we can do a lot of installations and training via remote online services if you prefer us not coming out to your businesses. We are posting these little videos for you. We're going to post it on this landing page. I made reference to this earlier. So on this landing page, once you've logged in, on the left-hand side where it says notifications, the videos will be logged over there to show you exactly how the DebiCheck systems will be working, and how you could actually just upload a transaction, get your reports on that transaction, and then manage these transactions. So just quickly again to cover the high levels, DebiCheck authentication channels that are available is TT1, TT2, and TT3. So these are the channels through which you authenticate a transaction, and then it is in DebiCheck. It's not anymore a TT1 transaction or a TT2. These are only your authentication mechanisms. So you would use a card and PIN on TT3, which is terminal based, to do that transaction, and then it is in DebiCheck. From there, that's always the DebiCheck transaction. So your authentication channel on TT1 and TT2, the authentication for the consumer can take place and can happen either via ATM. It can be done in branch, so you can identify, the consumer can identify themselves in a branch, in his own banking branch, and then tell them to and ask them to authenticate a specific transaction for him. You could also be doing this through a mobile app. So for those consumers that are on mobile app banking services or internet banking services, they could actually access those channels and authenticate transactions. But more likely, they will be using the USSD platform. So that's why it's important for us that you get this e-booklet, that you understand how these things work, so that you can also assist in educating the public and educating your customers on how to authenticate a transaction for you in the DebiCheck environment. So just quickly and briefly to understand TT1, 2, and 3 on how these things work in the TT1 environment, you'll see that there's a similarity between TT1 and TT2, which is in the middle there, which is your authentication mechanisms. So it's on a USSD string. As I've mentioned already, you get your SMS notification, it feels like that. And then you can do that. You can do your phone application, internet banking, and over the branch counter, over the counter at the branch. But TT1 essentially is a single upload, one by one on the website, which can also be run and driven from our browser solutions, as I've mentioned before. The consumer must still authenticate the transaction on one of the yellow highlighted components there, one of those strings. He or she authenticates the transaction. And under TT1, you've got two different options. You've got a real-time option, and you've got a delayed option. If you choose the real-time, then that transaction has to be authenticated within 120 seconds. As I've mentioned before, there are some delays in getting those authentications back. There's a change management process that's been that's going through with our customers. They need to understand this thing. It's very difficult to get this thing done in 120 seconds. So we've defaulted everything to a delayed platform, which just gives you more time, gives your consumer more time to do this thing. In fact, it allows the transaction up to 8 o'clock tonight to actually be done. And just be aware that in theory, you can actually upload a transaction today for tomorrow in the DebiCheck environment. However, there's a challenge with this, because for us to present the transactions for processing at a bank, we have to actually extract these transactions and send them through to the bank by 3 o'clock. They have to be at the bank. 3 p.m. in the day, they have to be at the bank. So if you're uploading a transaction at 3 o'clock and we've already extracted the file and sent it to the bank, how's your transaction, even if it is authenticated before 8 tonight, how's it going to be presented for the next day? So we've had to actually build in some blocks into this thing to stop people from uploading transactions for the very next day. And this happened. These were some of the challenges that were being experienced. We've blocked this thing out. We've locked it out. So you can now only upload a transaction 2 days from now and have the transaction in the process. In your TT2 process, the consumer has a little bit more time. They've got 2 days to actually authenticate this transaction. Again, you can do it single, one by one, or you can do batches. So you all know about our bulk files that we had in the ADO and NADO environment. It is akin, it's similar to that. So it is simply batches that you would upload into the system. or you would have a web integrated platform that you could also use. So again, going back to our Delta solutions, Delphin and Webfin, and use those channels to get the transactions into DebiCheck at NuPay to process these transactions. But this does give the consumer a little bit more time. He's got time until 2 days from now. So there's 2 days in total. Transactions can be authenticated by consumers in both TT1 and 2, TT1 delayed and 2, between 3 a.m. and 8 o'clock in the morning. So if you uploaded a transaction at 3 a.m. in the morning on TT1, your consumer could actually go and authenticate that transaction for you. Highly unlikely that they would get up at that time. Just like it's very highly unlikely that they would come into your shop at 5 o'clock in the morning to do a real-time transaction with his card and PIN to pay you. But we've seen stranger things happen in the industry, and we've heard of these kind of instances that have happened in the past. And then obviously TT3, as I've mentioned already, it is immediate. It is card and PIN by consumer on a terminal. It is authenticated and so forth. We've got various options there. Again, we've got pre-stage. So pre-stage, working on the NuPay website direct. You could also work on the NuPay app. So yes, we've got an app which actually works with all of our terminals, including the mobile Go terminal, and it connects with our normal mobile terminals. And you can create the pre-stage transaction on the website and then authenticate this thing at a later stage. We've got the My Client portal, which is the previous screen that you saw with those tentacles, the round circle with the tentacles going out for all of the different services. That is the My Client portal, and you could upload all of your transactions via that platform as well. We are still working on enhancements. We are still improving the system. We keep on driving the user experience for you. It is critically important that we receive your feedback, that we receive your input and other suggestions around user experience enhancements, because these things is what's going to make the system work better for you. It is a massively, massively complex system where an ADO and NATO platform had 13 fields in total that you could send up for a transaction. In the DebiCheck environment, you can look to roughly 48 fields that have to be sent up for a transaction. We've done this thing down. We've done a lot of backwards compatibility and setup and so forth, so that your transactions can still go up in a look and feel to you like it looks like an ADO or a NATO transaction. So you don't have to go and capture 48 fields. We will do a lot of the hard lifting for you. We will make sure that all of these things are done. But there's lots of configuration that can still be done by yourself as well. So you can change this thing in our custom upload settings. You can say to me, so those 48 fields, I want to custom upload and I want to present my own transaction. I'm not going to rely on you to do it. We've got that option. You could do that. You just have to remember every single day when you need to upload transactions for the next day that you need to extract them and send them through to us. So there are obviously integrated models for this, and you can actually run these things if you are running your own software. You can run it through integrated services with us as well. We don't only integrate the Delphin and Webfin services. We make the specification available to absolutely anyone that wants to integrate with the system, and they can push the transactions through. We are working with numerous service providers to get them online so that you guys can process better as well. So what's the advantages over a TT3 versus a TT1 and 2 kind of a scenario? Well, data. Data capture and processing, as well as timelines. These are probably the two big things that stands out when you look at this. A TT3 transaction, because the card and PIN is being used by the consumer, you know that the account that is linked to this card in his hand is actually going to be debited. So you can upload that transaction safely, knowing that it's absolutely going to process against the right account and so forth. In terms of TT1 and 2, you have to take the data which is available to you on a piece of paper from a bank statement. You have to rely on your staff to capture that correctly and send it up correctly to that person. Then you have to rely on the bank having the correct phone number for his mobile phone, his or her mobile phone at the bank, so that they can actually reach that specific consumer, the one who owns that account, and get that person to authenticate the transaction within the given timelines. So post authentication is TT1 and 2. So you send up a lot of data Then you wait and you hope that you had the right data that was sent up and so forth. And take note that the percentages of growth that I mentioned earlier, all of that was in these channels, TT1 and 2. This is where it happened, people. This was during lockdown. So it is possible. Is it as easy, as streamlined, and as simple to use a TT3? No, of course not. Because on TT3, you don't have to ask the bank. It's pre-authenticated. So you're creating your authentication and sending the transaction through to the bank, telling them, here's a transaction, but wait, here's our very mark moment again. But wait, there's more. I already have my authentication, and here it is. So we take care of that, obviously, at NuPay. We send that up for you, and we make sure that all of these things get processed in the right time. That is our role that we play. We obviously negotiate the best possible pricing that we could get for you. And there was a lot of effort put into that pricing negotiations to try and get you in exactly the same financial situation that you are in right now with NuPay. The only difference is that, remember earlier on I said, make sure that your management of your transactions become strong. You have to focus on that. That is the primary thing that you have to focus on in DebiCheck, is managing your transactions, understanding dates, understanding when the consumers will be receiving their funds. If you are managing these things effectively, then in theory, you could actually bring down your cost of collections in the DebiCheck environment versus an ADO environment. So very, very important. You have to look at these things and you have to say, how do we do this? Well, we do this through management of transactions and then driving the platform that way. So can you still do management of your transactions? Of course you can. So what are the different options? So maybe just to explain transaction management quickly. This is, as you know it at the moment, transaction maintenance, where you go in and you do a date change or you do a tracking change. You do all of these different types of changes on transactions. Now, take note and remember earlier on I mentioned something. I said a transaction becomes reversible when you mess with the date that it's processing on, when you mess with the value that it's being processing on, or when there's fraud, obviously. So in the first two scenarios, be very careful what you change, when you change it, but also know and understand that the system will actually guide you through certain things. So when you're doing a change which makes a transaction reversible, it will give you the option A or B. It will force you, and this comes down to configuration of your system again. We can configure this for you guys. Okay, so it comes down to that we will guide you and say to you, when you do this change, you can actually do it in a level where the transaction does not need a new authentication from the consumer. Therefore, it will still not be reversible. However, if you change this thing, it will be reversible. Therefore, we suggest and we recommend you have to go through a new authentication of the transaction with your consumer. Now, take note, you could actually change the amount of a transaction without a new authentication, but that does make your transaction reversible. So the different types that there are available is changes with authentication, without authentication, and then there's changes that's just a notification. So in those instances, a notification has to be, by way of rule of the system, the DebiCheck system, there has to be a notification through to the consumer to tell them, we are doing this change, and this is your notification that that change has been done. So there's certain tracking changes, for instance. There has to be a notification. It doesn't mean that the transaction becomes reversible. It just means that a notification was served to the consumer to tell him, hey man, this thing's going to run for a longer period than what you initially thought, to make sure that there's actually money coming in. Then obviously on the website, you can do different maintenance types. So there's mandate maintenance as well as installment maintenance. So when you're doing mandate maintenance, typically all of those changes will be items that you have to change with a new authentication. Not all of them, but most of them, you would have to do a new authentication. Whereas installment maintenance, do not necessarily need new authentications. A lot of them can only go with a notification, and a lot of them only goes without any sort of authentication on that transaction. Again, the consultants can really guide you and train you and show you more about how these things work and how they're all put together. Through our systems in the Dolphin and Webfin solutions, obviously all of these maintenance types are built in, and again, the system will guide you through the right way of doing these things. And that is where the web service components come in. Those changes can still be done on both mandate as well as installment level for consumers. Something that's very important to understand, and I think that this is something that a lot of people actually forget about, and they don't really look at this thing, and that is in terms of your management of your transactions. At the moment, you will know that there is a thing called a 120-day rule. So in other words, if you had a transaction which was valid for a period of 120 days, so your transactions uploaded, you've got a total of, let's say, 8 contracts that is uploaded against the consumer, against his account, 8 installments that's going to process against their account. You can make changes and represent installments for a period of 120 days. So for 4 months, you can go and make changes on these installments. So after 4 months, if your installment in month 1 has failed, you will no longer be able to make changes on it. That's in ADO, that's in NADO. That's how these systems work. In the DebiCheck system, the rules have changed. We are now working on something which is called a 7-day or 7-cycle rule. Okay, so a 7-cycle rule entails that a transaction that is processed in month 1. So if you look at scenario 1 at the top there, in month 1 it achieves a success. It's green. It achieves a success. That transaction is valid, and you can work on that one. The next month you've got a failure, and for 7 consecutive months you've got red. You've got a failure on all of these installments. Then that is 7 consecutive cycles on a monthly frequency. But take note that that could also be weekly. So if this was a weekly client, it would be 7 weeks and not 7 months. So your transaction in month 2 can be rescheduled. Yes, you can still resubmit and reschedule transactions. You can reschedule that transaction within 7 months onto the system, not after that. Once you've had 7 consecutive cycle failures on the system, you will know then that your transaction has then been suspended by the bank, and you can no longer process against that transaction. So just to further clarify and make sure that we all get the concept of it, in scenario 2, you can see there the first installment was successful. The second installment was a failed transaction. The third month becomes a successful. So that resets the period of 7 consecutive failures back to 0 because you've had a success. And you could now reschedule that second month installment anywhere into the next 7 cycles again. Just take note of one thing, please. When you're rescheduling a transaction, this is one other scenario where a transaction becomes reversible. So if you look at point 4 on the left there, when we reschedule a transaction, the rules of the system states we have to pad that new installment that goes up. So let's say you're taking, in scenario 2, you're taking month 2 and you're rescheduling it together with month 3. The month 2 transaction will have an R in front of it, which means, it doesn't mean reversible, it means rescheduled. But it is equal to, or it becomes a reversible transaction. So take note of that. Please be aware of that transactions can be reversed once you've had a reschedule. And the reason for that is effectively you have changed the date of the transaction from month 2 to month 3 or month 4 or wherever in the future. It's no longer in month 3. So that installment's date has been changed. And that is effectively why, based on date change, the transaction can then be reversed again. Yes, people, we don't like it either. Unfortunately, we don't make the rules. We have to make sure that the system works well with it. However, please speak to your account managers, speak to your consultants, speak to our call center representatives from either NuPay or Delta side, it is one team, and they can assist you and inform you of other ways in which you can actually do these kinds of rescheduling in a different way to assist you in your business going forward. Then, in terms of the different mandates that are available, I can tell you that there are 3 different types of mandates that you can create. Now, remember, the first one that we had was when we explained TT1, TT2, and TT3. These are not mandates. TT1, 2, and 3 are actually ways of authentication. These are now the mandates. So you can create 3 different types of mandates against the consumer's account. The first of that being a fixed mandate. So a fixed mandate is where the amount that you are debiting is fixed. However, on the back end, we will still create a maximum collection amount against that installment. So in other words, if you had R1,000 installment, we would add 50% to that value and then create a maximum installment amount of 1,500 Rand. And that is sent up as a installment or as a transaction, a mandate for your customer's transaction that is going to process. So this is, you remember earlier on, I spoke about the scenario where you've got penalty interests that you might want to add onto a transaction. So when you do these penalties and that kind of thing, you're allowed to now create a new installment or represent the installment and then increase your amount from 1,000 Rand up to 1,050 Rand or 1,270 Rand or whatever it is legally for you to do. The challenge is you are changing the installment amount. The second you do that, that transaction under a fixed mandate installment value becomes reversible. Very important to understand that. Next, we've got a variable mandate installment. So now in this one, the amount can actually differ in a specific period. So you can set up periods where you can adjust the amount, and you can adjust it by either a repo rate or by a fixed Rand value or by a fixed percentage. And you do these increases and amendments within a specific cycle. So you could say it happens annually. So for instance, if you're on medical aid or insurance services, and you say, so on an annual basis, increase my transaction value by 8%, then the system will take care of increasing that rate for you automatically annually. But you could also change your cycle to say every 6 months, every quarter. There are different cycles and frequencies. Again, very important to speak to your consultants, and these guys will actually guide you in terms of how you can manage your transaction better. The last mandate type that we've got is the usage-based mandate. So usage-based mandate, think in terms of a mobile phone company, electricity accounts, and those kinds of things. Now, your maximum amount, you remember in the first fixed mandate installment, we spoke about the maximum amount of 1,500 Rand and your installment being 1,000 Rand. So in usage, your maximum amount can be authorized at 5,000 Rand. But you can now only use 2,000 Rands worth of call time during the month. So at the end of the month, your mobile network provider may only debit you 2,000 Rand instead of the 5,000 Rand which you've authorized. Now, when you do that, that transaction, because it's lower than your installment amount that was authorized, is actually non-reversible. So this is quite a nice type of transaction to have for the usage platform, where you can debit a different amount to the one that was originally authorized, provided that it is lower than what that amount is for the installment that you have authorized against the consumer's account. Then the next question that we get quite often from people is, which banks are available for us to process transactions against? So what you want to look at here is not the last column of yeses and nos, but rather the second to last column of yeses and nos, because that says to you which bank you can process a transaction against that they will actually pay to you. So a big question is that African bank item. Unfortunately, they are not there. and you cannot process a transaction against an African bank account yet. However, please take note of the second to last one there, Bidvest Bank. So a lot of you have asked us, so how does it actually work? Can we process transactions against Old Mutual Finance, Old Mutual Bank? The answer here is yes, because those transactions are actually processed through Bidvest Bank. So we see those transactions going through, and they have been processing already. So these are all the banks. This list again is also been posted onto our website, and people can actually see it there on our DebiCheck website. So from here, I'm going to go over to a Q&A session now. We're going to take some of the other questions and things that we have received throughout, and we'll be handling these questions with you guys. So Johan has been creating a list of questions that he wants to run through with us. All of these questions were presented and submitted by you guys, our clients, to us. So I'm going to hand over now. Johan, are you there?
I am here. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Perfect. Vaughan, thank you so much. Yeah, I think a lot of the information that you shared currently in the presentation has already covered a lot of the questions that were submitted from our merchants. However, I will still go through some of the things that we have spoken about and just to maybe get some more clarity on it. So maybe firstly, so on your slide, you did mention, about TT3 being a pre-authenticated transaction where TT1 and 2 is a post-authenticated transaction. So one of the questions that came through is, in the instance where a merchant is trying to assist their customer and their customer perhaps doesn't have access to a smartphone or access to internet banking facility, what are the different options that a consumer can use in order to authenticate that transaction for the merchant?
100%. Thank you, Johan. So remember, I spoke about the USSD chain. So your consumers will be receiving a USSD type of transaction message from his bank. So on this message, it will say, you've got a transaction for ABC Cash for an amount of 1,000 Rand to authenticate for this specific date and so forth. The consumer then has to reply on that USSD message and authenticate the transaction. So USSD would be the string, and this would form part of our e-booklet that we would be building around this presentation, as well as the authentication methods for the consumers to inform you guys and show you guys what it actually looks like and what it would feel like for the consumer. How would they go about the process? What do they have to press? What do they have to answer? And how do they have to respond to each of these items one by one? So USSD, it looks and feels like an SMS. And I would have to say that all South Africans in this country must know how an SMS works. I'm pretty confident of that fact, especially if they are taking loans from you. Then they will know how these kinds of things work. The cell phone penetration rate in South Africa is phenomenally high. In fact, most people have, a lot of people have more than one phone, not most, but a lot of people have more than one phone. And in your customer base as well, we will see that. So they will know how an SMS or a USSD string works.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now, also, as we know, it's like in South Africa, there's quite a few banks and there's a lot of new and upcoming banks as well in South Africa. So we're seeing more and more specific bank cards being issued, and these types of cards traditionally we couldn't assist with on ADO. Some of them, for example, Old Mutual Bank, Time Bank, and African Bank. Do we as NuPay have any indication whether these banks will also be participating in the DebiCheck space?
So Jan, like I mentioned, the Old Mutual Bank item is it falls under the Bidvest Bank platform. So as an issuer, a payer of transactions, yes, you can process a transaction against the Bidvest Bank. You can upload those transactions. A non-reversible transaction, mind you, in the past it used to be only NATO transactions that you could upload there. So this is very good news. We can upload non-reversible transactions against the old mutual bank accounts. Time Bank, unfortunately, are not on the system yet. They're not uploaded there yet. But there is obviously lots of drive to get more banks onto the system.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now, one important component, and you did explain it, but perhaps just touch on it again in terms of a DebiCheck mandate. So there's been a lot of discussions previously with regards to mandates specifically. So PASA talks about mandates in the form of a merchant and a consumer should have a mandate between them and an agreement between them. And then we also talk about DebiCheck electronic mandates. So should a merchant still have an agreement and a debit order mandate authorization with his customer, or is that now contained in the electronic mandate in DebiCheck?
So this is it's a very good question. It's a very contentious question. So the rules state the following: you need to have a mandate. So that is, over and above your electronic mandate for the actual transaction, you need to have an agreement which has a mandate on it in which the consumer gives you explicit authority to debit that account. So there needs to be a mandate still on the side. Now let's just think about this thing and unpack this a little bit so that we can all just try and understand the process a bit better. What have we said in the past? We've said that if you have a transaction with a mandate that was created electronically, then a transaction in DebiCheck, then a transaction can be reversed only when there is a fraud, B, an amount change, or C, a date change on that transaction. So it's no longer a matter of a consumer walking into a bank like the NADO scenario where they tell the bank, reverse this transaction, and within the first 40 days, the bank hits a button and the transaction is reversed. If the amount was not changed, if he cannot prove fraud on the transaction, and if the date was not changed, the bank will not push a button. In the NADO environment, still furthermore, after the 40-day period, the bank will come back to the creditor asking for these funds against the consumer, and it will say to them, can you please supply us with your written signed mandate from the consumer with his signature on it, so that we can actually view this thing to see that it does match. His signature matches with the bank signature, and so that we know that we must not award or approve the dispute request after the 40 days. In NADO, DebiCheck does not have this. DebiCheck looks at, again, those three fields. Is it fraud? Has the date been changed? Or has the amount been changed? And based on those fields, it will go back. Now, please understand that in terms of the entire debit order abuse rules, etc., you must have a mandate. The banks still require that. But I think the instances where you will see the disputes or reversals coming through the system is probably going to be significantly less than in the NADO environment. I hope that answers it for you, Johan.
Definitely does. Thank you very much. So I'm going to let you rest your voice for 2 seconds, and I actually have a question for Brendan. Brendan, are you still with us?
I am still here.
Perfect. Brendan, so technical question with regards to terminals. So it's two questions, but I'll ask them in one. So first question is, so if I'm a current ADO merchant, do I need to get a new NuPay machine in order to do DebiCheck, or can the existing machine be updated? And also, if I'm a TCC merchant, if I use a TCC terminal, can I also still do DebiCheck on a TCC device?
Okay, so it all depends. So the terminal related question, well, are we going to swap terminals around or exchange terminals? If the merchants are using the Verifone Magic 3 terminal, which is a dark gray black terminal, we have to swap or exchange those terminals to either a Magic 4 terminal, Verifone Magic 4 terminal, or a Bluebird terminal. That's not just because of DebiCheck. It's got to do with PCI compliance. So yes, if you're using a Magic 3 terminal, your terminal will be exchanged to either a Magic 4 or a Bluebird terminal. If you are not sure what type of terminal you are using, please contact your account manager or the NuPay contact center. They will be able to tell you exactly what type of terminal you are using and if your terminal needs to be exchanged or not. On the TCC side, again, if you are using a Magic 3 terminal, we'll have to exchange that to a different terminal, Magic 4 or a Bluebird terminal. If you are using a Magic 4 terminal already or a Bluebird terminal already, and you are connecting via TCC, it is very, very easy for us to add your DebiCheck solution to that terminal. Again, please contact your account manager or the NuPay or Delta contact center, and we can arrange it for you now already. It's already available.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ben. Vaughan, sorry, so you had your 2 seconds. Back to you again. So currently, obviously, ADO has got not necessarily benefits, but features that we have become used to on ADO. Are there any additional features in DebiCheck, for example, that we can't have or that we don't have currently in ADO?
So the DebiCheck environment versus ADO, you're looking at a very tough answer there, because the difference essentially is versus the NATO platform, where you're going into a non-reversible kind of a scenario and so forth. But with Poppy and all of these things coming around, there is a component where there has to be certain rights that's awarded to the consumer. There has to be. You all know it as well. If you look at the debit order scams of 99 Rand against our accounts and so forth, you need to and have to have the right to dispute or challenge or question those transactions before they actually get processed successfully against your account. If you don't have those rights, then, well, anyone can just go and debit your account left, right, and center and get away with it. So very important to know that the DebiCheck system does give the consumer some rights. It does. But if you are doing everything within the rights of the system, you're processing it on the right date, you're processing the right amount against his account, and above all, there was no fraud, no 99 Rand scams, then this transaction is non-reversible and non-disputable. So this is what makes the DebiCheck system very unique in its offering. Furthermore, obviously, the fact that it is no longer only ADO transactions that are non-reversible, but also your transactions originated from our website server solutions or our web services solutions into DebiCheck. And understanding the difference between a mandate and so forth, maybe just to expand on that a little bit more as well. When you're creating a mandate, you're creating a mandate for a series of installments that can be managed against the transaction. In the ADO and NATO environment, you're creating a contract with multiple installments in it. And you can go and change with this entire contract, whereas now you're creating a mandate for a period of time. Now understand that in the ADO environment, you've got a limit of a maximum of 30,000 Rand that you may process against a consumer's account. This is the same for NATO. In the DebiCheck environment, you can push this up to 500,000 Rand if you wanted to. You have to be careful around that, because you could have some scenarios where there are certain challenges and your staff might try and take some chances with you. And we actually default our limits down to 50,000 Rand per installment at the moment, but you can request us to move that up to 500,000 Rand. So it does create a very different kind of a scenario for you. Something which is also different is the fact that you can no longer debit just any card that is open. It has to be a person's account. So at the moment, you cannot debit any business accounts in the ADO network. In the DebiCheck network. Whereas in ADO, if you had a card that was enabled on the network, the bin is open, then you could process those transactions. So maybe that's a reduction that we can look at one end. However, on the other end, if you're doing business with a company or an organization, then surely they should not be running around with an ATM card processing transactions on a terminal. So yes, essentially there are a few differences. The final difference that there is in terms of the term. On the ADO platform, you are looking at a maximum term of 60 months or 5 years. So that could be 240 weeks as well, which is still 5 years. So that's the maximum term that you could create of transactions in the ADO and NADO network. Whereas in the DebiCheck network, you could actually be processing transactions for as long as you like. It is a recurring mandate that is being created until it is stopped. So that mandate exists until your entire contract has been completed and the cycle has been finished off. So that could be 30 years, essentially, if you wanted it to be. I hope that answers you.
Yes, no, it definitely does. So another, like a concern that came through, so currently in the ADO space, merchants, do have the right to stop a future dated debit order. And currently in the ADO space, when that happens, you will only see that when the transaction goes up for presentment. However, in the DebiCheck space, am I correct in saying that now if a merchant stops a future dated debit order or cancels that mandate, you can actually be notified prior to the actual installment going off?
Johan, there's a suspension notice that must come through to us that says that a installment was suspended, a future dated installment. So like the ADO platform, you can create, like you said, you can create a suspension of the future installments. In DebiCheck, you can do that as well as a consumer. We try not to talk too much about it because we try and get the marketing out to the masses to a minimum and down low. So yes, unfortunately, you can do a future stop on a transaction. We have to receive a notification of suspension of that mandate. At the moment, unfortunately, it's not working 100% all of the time. Thankfully, we have not received a lot of these. In fact, the only ones that we have received is where we've actually been testing these things. So not there yet. We have logged the requests through to all of the banks to make sure that they actually get all of these things in line and 100% according to the rules.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So you mentioned on the slide where we had the different transaction types, TT1, TT2, TT3, how long a customer has to respond in order for that transaction to be created. From a merchant perspective, are there cutoff times where you would need to submit a transaction in order for your consumer to authenticate it?
Yes, 100%. So the 3 a.m. and 8 p.m. kind of timelines, those are the timelines that you're looking at. There is a drive to actually get the entire platform open for 24 hours. Some banks have increased their 8 o'clock cutoff until 9 o'clock. I must tell you that it's difficult for me to see, but I'm sure there could be scenarios, but it's difficult for me right now, here where I sit, to see and understand when customers would actually need or require this other period where they actually allowing or authenticating transactions at such a late time. But yes, it is possible until 8 o'clock, and sometimes some banks 9 o'clock tonight to still authenticate or upload those transactions into the system. Perfect.
So just to clarify, so for customers that are currently using ADO, that's possibly non-micro lenders who are also on this session, just to clarify that DebiCheck does not just apply to micro lenders, but to all customers, correct, that use currently ADO?
100%, absolutely correct. So, as you know, we've got a multitude of gyms, and other subscription service kind of companies. We've got companies offering aid to clients in terms of car repair services, and all sorts of different other industries, insurance companies and so forth. So all of these companies, all of these industries, all of these organizations can upload future dated transactions. So if you can think of something that needs to be paid off in future over a period or over a term, or just on a single installment, but a future dated installment, then absolutely you can create this transaction, and you can ask us to process these transactions for you. The only exclusion and exception that there is at this stage is that you cannot process against a business account, an organization's account. It has to be a personal account, as I said.
Perfect. So you did talk a little bit about the maintenance that you can do on a transaction with authentication, re-authentication, without re-authentication, and with notice. So currently in the ADO space, we have quite a lot of maintenance options available. For example, cancellations of a transaction, rescheduling of a transaction. Are all of those options that are available in ADO at the moment still available in DebiCheck?
John, most certainly yes. So we can do all of these things. We can do cancellation of transactions. We can do date changes. We can do tracking changes. You can reschedule transactions. You can. All of these things are possible. You've got the old MI transaction, which all of our customers knows very, very well, which is a mandate installment or a management installment. So you're doing a date change as well as a tracking change all in one move. All of these functions are still available. And as I said, the system will guide you through the process to know when you have to obtain a new mandate and when you don't. But maybe just as a guideline to all of our customers, when you are doing changes, please, to try and reduce the cost that there is on you, because people, please understand, if you are requesting a new mandate authentication from a consumer, that thing has to be remandated to your customer. So it has to be sent to him. He still has to receive it. The second we have to follow that channel to get a new authentication or authorization from the consumer, there is a lot more associated in terms of cost from the bank to us, and then in turn to you to actually process that re-authentication. So very important, do your authentications on installment level. Try and do as much as possible of your amendments, at least, on installment level, and we will assist you and guide you. If something is not possible on installment level and you are required to do a new mandate, then we will push you through that channel. We will say to you, sorry, you cannot do it here. You need to go to the other side. A simple rule of thumb is when you drop down that arrow to see all the different options that are available, if it's not there, then you can't do it on that level. Then you need to go over to a different level and do it on the other side. So if it's not under installment, go to your mandate and then you can do the amendment on that side. But yes, all of the options available, and the system will guide you and assist you in doing it in the right way.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So another question, and this might be for Brendan or yourself. I'm pretty sure either one of you can respond to it. In terms of DebiCheck specifically and the NuPay terminals, will contactless cards be allowed in DebiCheck? So the tap and go?
I'll leave that one to Brendan.
Thanks, VH. So at the moment, you cannot use contactless via ADO. It will not be available for DebiCheck, and unless we do receive an update in rules, and it's got to do with the authentication leg on ADO as well as on DebiCheck. Now, if you go to a Pick n Pay or a Checkers and your card is enabled for contactless, so you tap it on the terminal and you don't insert your PIN number, and off you go. That the transaction's approved and off you go. However, there is a limit that you have set, or the bank has set on your card, for a tap and go transaction to be done on a terminal without inserting your PIN number. Now, if you have a limit of, say, 500 Rand on your card, or the consumer has a limit of 500 Rand on their card, and we allow a contactless transaction via a TT3 DebiCheck, and they do not insert their PIN number, that means that the transaction was not authenticated. So I don't see contactless being available via a TT3 DebiCheck solution. Because of that specific reason, a merchant has to insert their PIN number in order to authenticate the transaction.
100% correct. I would like to add one thing though. It is not a matter of our terminals not being able to go to tap and go. We do actually offer tap and go as a service on our real-time POS transactions. It is available. So that is absolutely not it. But Brendan summed it up 100% correctly. So it is for the DebiCheck environment and ADO environment that his statement is 100% valid for.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So a question that came through a lot in the past on ADO, and it is a valid question that's being raised again in the DebiCheck space. So we all know about Capitec cards where there were multiple accounts linked to a single card. And as we know, in the ADO space, it's the primary account that has been linked to the card that is used for an ADO transaction. So in the DebiCheck space, does that still apply where it will only be the primary account number linked to the card that will be used for the authentication and the transaction?
So Johan, this is a fantastic question to ask because it's actually a great enhancement that has been inside of the DebiCheck platform and network. So when you're creating a transaction on a terminal with a card swipe and the PIN entry, that terminal and that card will still use the primary account, just like it did before, and it might still be the wrong account. So it will still use that account to create the transaction. However, when you go into the maintenance options of the DebiCheck network and platform, the system that we offer you, you could actually go in there and you can change the account over to the other account number. Similarly, also, when you upload a TT1 or TT2 transaction, you could actually, when you're capturing the account details, you could capture the right account to debit against, and that will send it through to the right account. So the nice thing is you can now move this transaction electronically on that consumer's account within one bank, people, please. Unfortunately, not tracing and tracking between banks yet. However, I can tell you that it is actually something that PASA has in scope and on the radar for something to happen in future. How long is future? It's as long as that piece of string. We just don't know. But it is something that's on the radar. They are looking at interbank following of transactions as well. I would not hold my breath for that one, as it certainly is going to be some time before that happens. However, inside of one bank, you can now move the transaction between accounts for one consumer.
Thank you very much. So there are some questions coming through, and I'd like to urge the audience, if there are questions, to please send it through to us. I'm working through the questions right now, and then we'll answer these questions as best as possible. So in the DebiCheck space, so currently in the NATO space, automatically when you do an online transaction, so in other words, you load it via websites and not with a physical card present, that transaction is now currently in NATO automatically reversible. But in the DebiCheck space, so regardless of how you load the transaction, if you process within the rules, that transaction is then non-reversible. Is that correct?
That is 100% correct. So that is the benefit that DebiCheck has by a mile over the NATO platform. Your transaction, if processed correctly and within the rules, is non-reversible.
Perfect. And then just to clarify again, so you mentioned about the add installment. So you've got an option where you can reschedule a transaction, but you also have the option where you can add an installment. So if you add an installment at the end of the contract, and it's within the date that was originally supplied and the amount that was originally supplied, does that make that transaction non-reversible?
So adding an installment does make the transaction non-reversible. It is not a rescheduled transaction. It is something that is added. So it extends your contract term though, and then obviously therefore typically people would add values and amounts to that because there are penalty interests that are applied to that installment.
Perfect. And on the usage-based mandate, so we spoke about the different mandate types. In the usage-based one, where there is a maximum collection amount. So does it mean that if you change an amount within the agreed maximum collection amount, that transaction remains irreversible, that it cannot be reversed?
So it is important to understand the difference between an installment level, a regular amount, installment amount, and the maximum collection amount. But if your amount is below your installment amount, then that transaction is non-reversible. So the difference of the usage-based platform is that you can set the installment amount at the same value as your maximum amount. So it's not necessarily like the other two, like variable and fixed. Those two, it's always 50% higher than on your maximum amount. It's 50% higher than your installment amount. In the usage-based, you can have both values at the same value.
Perfect, thank you so much. So as a NuPay merchant, when you are uploading a transaction, how will you know if a consumer has authenticated that transaction?
So our system again will guide you through this process. Okay, so if you're not using an integrated system with Dolphin and Webfin with us, but you're using just the website, the standalone services, then when you create the transaction, obviously this would only be valid for TT1 and 2. TT3, as we've said, is pre-authenticated. So once you've got that transaction going through and the slip prints out and it says success, that means your transaction is done on TT3. That's another advantage that card and PIN on a terminal has over the other platform. Whereas in your TT1 and 2, the transaction is uploaded, it's created against the consumer's accounts, and it then awaits them to do their authentication. We will then take those transactions and we will pin them into a status which is referred to as pending. So you will have a pending status of transactions sitting there waiting for these authorizations or authentications to take place. And as they come through, we will actually move them out of pending over into an authorized status so that they are in fact authorized against the transactions. In your integrated services where we are working with Dolphin and Webfin, there's a message queue that is sent back to the system to tell them that it's moved out of pending and over into an authorized status. So then the transaction moves to available. So for instance, if you had a new card facility on that Dolphin system as well, when that status comes back to say that the transaction was authenticated by the consumer, then it would release the payment to that consumer's new card transaction automatically. You do not have to go and trigger that by yourself. So all of these things are automated, streamlined, and there to make your life easier and happier.
Okay, thank you so much. So we do see a lot of questions coming through with regards to reversibility. So I'm pretty sure that it is a very big topic for everyone, and everyone would like to understand that. So one thing that has come through was just with regards to day changes specifically. So people are talking about moving a transaction backwards and moving a transaction forward. So for example, if you've got a customer that previously got paid on the 15th and now he gets paid on the 25th. If you move that transaction forward to the 25th, will it automatically also become reversible?
So there's a lot of small, minutiae little details around the rules here that is very, very important. So please, before I answer this, I really want to ask you, please engage with your account managers. They can guide you through processes on how to understand this better. As a rule, however, and there are certain exceptions to this, and you need to understand those exceptions, but it's very difficult without actually showing you this stuff. So that's why I'm going to leave it to the account managers. But as a rule, and not working with the exceptions, when a transaction is set up, you create something in it which is called a date adjustment rule, yes or no indicator on a transaction. Now, by default, we add yes onto every single transaction. Now, there's a lot of stuff to bear in mind and to understand here. So in South Africa, we have banks on our banks. Our banks are either 6-day or 7-day processing banks. So let's take Capitec, for instance, they're a 6-day processing bank. ABSA is a 7-day processing bank. So when you upload a transaction to ABSA Bank, which is a 7-day processor. Your field of date adjustment, yes or no. When that's set at yes, as we do by default for all, then if you created an installment to be debited against the consumer's account on the 25th and he authorized you for the 25th, then we will debit on the 25th. The bank will process that transaction on the 25th. Whether that 25th be a Monday or a Sunday is irrelevant. They will process it on the 25th. If, however, it is, let's say, Capitec Bank, which is a 6-day processor, and you have selected date adjustment, yes, and you create, again, the transaction for the 25th, and that 25th falls on a Sunday, which is a non-processing day for them, then that transaction's installment will then be moved forward to the 26th, the Monday, to process. This is very important. So in the ADO and NADO environment, we used to always move these transactions back to the prior Friday or prior working day to start processing on the prior business working day. And then we extend the tracking and we process it throughout the weekend against the consumer's account until we achieve the funds, until we achieve the success against the transaction. Now, in the DebiCheck environment, if we move that date backwards to the 23rd from the Sunday, the 25th, we move it to the 23rd on the Friday, then we are actually changing the date and your transaction becomes reversible. Again, I'm going to reiterate, please speak to your consultants because there are certain rules that we can apply here, certain things. For instance, one of them is, if you've got a single term installment and your customer's regular pay date is the 25th of the month, and this month that 25th falls on the Sunday, you are completely within your right to create that transaction for the 23rd against your consumer's account and add another day or two of tracking. So you will know that we are, again, as always, we are including 3 days of tracking for our microfinanciers into the process. There is a cost, but it's built into the system. So the 3 days are included into that system so that you can process and track for 3 days against the consumer's account. If you move that forward to the 23rd, but the 25th is your payday, I would advise that you go for a 4th day and add 1 more day of tracking against the consumer's account for that specific transaction. So there's a lot of understanding that you have to do, and you need to speak to our account executives, our account managers, please. It is very important. They can guide you through all sorts of date management services. We do have something which we refer to as date management services. And when you opt in for date management services, we assist you and we help you through the system to manage all of these dates and things in a better way.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Vaughan. So I see, sorry, online, a couple of questions have now come through, the same question, that everyone just wants some clarification. We mentioned that in the maintenance, there's an option to change the account number when it's within the same bank. The question is, if you do that account number change, does that make a transaction reversible?
John, no, it does not. So the only instances where a transaction may be reversed is when you change the date or change the amount or fraud. So no, that is not seen as fraud. It is not a date change, and most certainly is an amount change. You are simply moving it to a corrected account. So no, the transaction is not reversible. You can still process it. Fantastic news for all of us.
That is fantastic news. Okay, so I see we've still got a couple of minutes left for questions. So one of the questions that came through, and this is specifically with regards to the consumer's cell phone number. You mentioned that the consumer needs to ensure that his cell phone number is updated at the bank. Is there any way for a merchant to know whether the cell phone number provided by a customer is the same as it is by the bank?
I wish there was. Unfortunately, we have no insight into what cell phone number is registered at the bank. But trust me and believe me, you'll know soon enough. So if you're speaking to your customer and you're saying to him, so we're going to send this transaction up via TT1 for you to authenticate, the bank will send you a message on your phone. Is your number at the bank the right number? Is it your latest number, or did you change your phone? He says, no, it's the same number. You say, no problem. And you hit that button to send up the transaction. If that transaction is sent to him, he will know about it, and he will receive the notification. If he does not, well, that means that his number is changed, and that is not the most recent number. So unfortunately, there's no way for us to check what the records are at the bank. They do not disclose that. I might as well go to the bank if I wanted that to be allowed. I might as well go to the bank and ask them to give me all of your balances and personal information with that as well, Johan. So unfortunately, they do not allow that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, then I think there's just one more question that we haven't touched on as yet. But also just on the previous question with the cell phone number, I think it's important to just remind all the merchants that in a situation where if you use TT3 card and PIN, the cell phone number is not a problem for you because you're authenticating on the card and PIN, and you don't have to worry about the USSD or internet banking authentication that has to be done because you'll be doing it immediately there on the card. So
100%.
Correct, yes. So the other question, sorry, let me just open it up here. Can you only load DebiCheck transactions between 3 a.m. and 8 p.m.? So create a DebiCheck transaction.
So you can create the transaction at any time. Would you really be creating it at 1 a.m.? Don't know, but it can only be authenticated between 3 and 8 or 9, where those banks are at 9. So you can upload it. I don't know which customer would actually be in your branch at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. with his card and PIN. I don't think that would happen. I don't think that you're going to get up at 1 a.m. to actually upload the transaction. So, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I see another question that come through now. So there's a lot of customers that currently have existing transactions on NADO with existing contracts that have already been done. With DebiCheck coming in, how would you manage that where it's an existing transaction that you have on NADO at the moment?
So remember that up until the 31st of October 2021, which is now the new cutoff, transactions can be processed inside of ADO and NADO platform up until the 31st of October 2021. Now, we can do a migration of your transactions that are in either ADO or NADO. I would not suggest the ADO one, but in ADO or in NADO over to the DebiCheck platform anytime from now, well, beginning of this year, up until the 31st of October next year, to migrate your transactions over into the DebiCheck environment. So to move your transactions to that platform. Now, what does this mean? It does mean that all of your reversibility or disputability rules around DebiCheck, around NADO, remains in place. Unfortunately, a transaction can still be reversed within the NADO rules, even if it's a migrated transaction processed within the DebiCheck platform. However, the difference is that your NADO transactions have moved over into a second early morning window and slot. So at the moment already, your NADO transactions are not processed in a randomized manner first in the morning with DebiCheck and ADO. DebiCheck and ADO take preference, if I can put it that way, which is almost a swear word in this industry, but it is processed first, and then thereafter the NADO transactions, still early morning, but the NADO transactions as well as migrated NADO transactions are processed second in the morning, and that will continue to do so until the 31st of October. You can migrate your transactions, and once they've been migrated, if your term extends beyond that period, your transactions will be processed as a DebiCheck transactions, but with the reversibility rules of a naira transaction, unfortunately.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, I see we are heading to our closing time now for the session before we are disconnected. So I think I'm going to close for the questions for now. I would, however, like to urge all our customers, if there are any further questions that they do have, to please get into contact with the account managers, and they can also speak to the NuPay contact center to raise any questions that they might have in order for us to assist them with that. So Vaughan, if you'd like to close the session off for us, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Johan. And thanks also to you and to Brendan for assisting and helping with these things. It's always good to know that you've got strong people that you can absolutely count on to be there and to assist with all of these kinds of things and have all the answers at all times. I think in closing, just a final statement from me, the final word for you is, folks, you have to start embracing DebiCheck. You have to start working on the system. If you do not understand it and you do not know it, by the 1st of May next year, you will be in a world of trouble. It is critically important that you start processing on DebiCheck network. Familiarize yourself with it, get to know the system, process some transactions. As you've seen from the growth numbers that we've got, there's millions and millions of rands being pushed through that network, through that channel at the moment already. There is great successes in the system. In fact, the success rate on DebiCheck is higher than we've got in the other payment platforms at the moment. So very important, please start using the system, embrace the future, embrace online, and look for alternative ways to generate income for your business and to go into an online scenario so that you can supplement your current income platforms. We have seen and we've gotten feedback and reports from all of our customers that the feet are just not in their shops at the moment. The volumes are down and it's not really showing lots of intention of picking up. Therefore, if you can access an alternative stream, an alternative way of getting the customers on board, then that is going to supplement your business and grow it for you. Embrace DebiCheck, embrace the future, embrace technology. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for everyone assisting on this. Also, our technical team standing behind the scenes, assisting us with all of these things, our marketing department. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much, folks.